Guys, Boxing Gossip here with an immediate post-fight reaction video to the Joseph Parker versus Razvan Cojanu fight. I'm recording this video immediately after the final bell. I've got the TV on pause. I haven't even seen the official judges' scorecards. But to be honest, this was a fight that, kind of ended. I presume the scorecards are going to be 12-0 in Joseph Parker's favour. Or maybe even wider than that, given that Cojanu had a point taken off. So I wasn't inclined to delay filming this in order to see the scores, but obviously I watched them after recording this. This is a result that none of us expected. I'm not aware of anyone here who was picking Cojanu to go the distance. The consensus, certainly my belief, was that this was going to be incredibly easy work for Joseph Parker. Unfortunately, not only was Cojanu able to go the distance, but he was able to go the distance in a fight that didn't show the best of Joseph Parker, and in a fight that, if we're honest, was fairly dull. Fairly dull. I know people have been tuning from all over the world to watch this fight. People from the States, people from New Zealand, etc. In England, this was on Sky, and the Sky commentary spent large portions of the fight comparing it to the Vladimir Klitschko-Anthony Joshua fight. And it must be said, whilst the world is still remembering that fight and getting over that fight, this was pretty drab in comparison. Parker, I thought he started off okay in the first round. He came out using his footwork, quick hands, quick feet. He was trying to jab, trying to double jab. I saw Parker early looking to go to the body, and I thought it was a relatively decent from Joseph Parker. Relatively decent start for Joseph Parker. Cojanu, he looked very slow, very lumbering. To me, he looked like a poor man's Alexander Dimitrenko, or a poor man's Alexander Ustinov, something like that. Very, very slow indeed. From quite early stages in this fight, I'd say as early as the second, third round, it was quite clear that Razvan Cojanu had adopted what I call a sparring partner's mentality. When I say I call it a sparring partner's mentality, I guess a lot of people involved in boxing say that, but you get my point. Cojanu has sparred with some high-class heavyweights. He sparred extensively with Parker, extensively with Povetkin. He's been in camps with Charles Martin, Dillian White. This is a guy who's sparred a lot of rounds. This is a guy who's had 300 amateur fights, etc. So what he seemed to be in is in a mode where he wasn't trying to win the fight. It seemed that Cojanu never really had ambition to win this fight. But instead, it seemed that Cojanu was simply trying to stay alive in the fight, not get knocked out. He was in there to survive. He was in there to frustrate. He was in there to go the distance. But he wasn't in there necessarily to win and cause the upset on Joseph Parker. And that kind of made it very frustrating. Cojanu was looking to use his size to frustrate. He was leaning on Parker. He was trying to hold Parker up close, and he actually had a point taken off in the fourth for putting his hand around the back of Parker's neck. I've got to admit, I thought that was a very harsh point to be deducted from Cojanu, although I do appreciate that Cojanu was spending large portions of this fight trying to hold and trying to spoil, really. Parker kept disciplined early on and kept trying to jab his way in, trying to bank punches to the body and work on his jab, but he wasn't really finding the success against Cojanu. Cojanu had a good tight guard. He kept his guard relatively tight, and Parker didn't really find a key to unlock Razvan Cojanu's defence. Parker, I think what happened in this fight was Parker was looking to jab from range and use straight punches from range, and Cojanu and his tight guard were able to negate the majority of those attacks. So from about the fourth round onwards, you saw Parker trying to apply a bit more pressure, and you saw Parker trying to close down that distance and trying to put power punches in from more mid-range to close range. I thought Parker, for me, was slightly sloppy when he got to the inside. I thought he was quite clumsy on the inside and very guilty of smothering his own work. The punches he was throwing from the inside, they really weren't clean punches. They were cuffing punches, they were wide punches, and they lacked some of the cleanness that you'd expect from a world championship boxer. I thought he could have done more on the inside in order to create angles. Often what I'd see is he'd throw a double jab, rush into range, and then just hurl something kind of cuffing over the top, which Cojanu was able to ride or able to dodge. I thought Parker could have done more to create an angle. If you're fighting on the inside, potentially you could put a shoulder in to create an angle with the backhand. Potentially you could use your feet to position an opponent and then do a pivot to the side to change the angle. But I thought he was kind of guilty of working his way onto the inside and then more just flailing a bit clumsily as opposed to clinical inside boxing execution. There was a lack of an uppercut from Parker. I thought Cojanu, looking at him in this fight, there were times I thought he was very, very open for the uppercut, and I was looking to see Joseph Parker try and implement that punch, but he didn't really use that to great effect in the fight. And in fact, I think I saw him throw 3 or 4 over the course of the fight, and I think all of them actually missed a target, which was disappointing. I also thought Parker could have done more, in terms of feinting on his way in, because Cojanu, being a big guy, was simply on occasion just able to step back from the jab. So maybe throwing in a feint would have been helpful as well to the equation. But all in all, it was a slightly messy performance from Parker. And about halfway, he seemed to adopt the approach of actually going on the back foot, and Cojanu trying to walk him down and position him in the corners, and Parker looking to counterpunch. And it led to several fairly dull jab rounds that Parker was always winning. I mean, Parker was always comfortable in the fight, but he really wasn't making much of a statement in there. At no point in the fight was Cojanu really wobbled or hurt. At no point could you say Parker really went through the gears in terms of getting him out of there. And I kind of felt, that Parker's inside work was, far from refined, let's put it that way. He didn't look anywhere near as educated a boxer when Parker was trying to create the pressure on the inside than when he was looking to use his jab from range. It must have been very frustrating for Joseph Parker. The opponent wasn't in there to win. Had Cojanu come looking to win, I'm sure the gaps would have been there for Parker to find and to get him out of there. But Cojanu is not a rated opponent. He's not in the heavyweight top 50. He's probably not in the heavyweight top 100. He got stopped in a few rounds in the Boxino tournament by Donovan Dennis, who's not a name that we really recognise towards the top of heavyweight boxing. And it was anticipated this would be very, very easy work for Parker. So it was a frustrating night for Joseph Parker against an opponent who didn't want to fight. And I think we know that Parker's better than this. This wasn't the best of Joseph Parker. Maybe the fact that he was motivated for the Hughie Fury fight and kind of overlooked Razvan Cojanu when he came in at late notice was an element. He knew Cojanu from sparring. Perhaps he was up for the biggest fight of his life in Hughie Fury, and maybe he was inclined to overlook Cojanu. Potentially that's why he came in slightly heavier. Potentially that's why his physique appeared to be slightly softer on the scales yesterday. But it really wasn't the best of Parker. Towards the end of the fight, I'm not going to say Parker looked like he was tired, because I think that's an overstatement. I don't think Cojanu was doing enough to make Parker tire. But certainly Cojanu was landing single punches. There was a few occasions Parker was caught, and Parker appeared to be more fighting in bursts. He'd do 20 seconds of combination punching, then he'd go on the back foot for 30 seconds. And I just wonder if maybe he didn't have the best training camp in the lead up to this fight. Maybe he'd overtrained. Maybe he, let himself go a bit after the Hughie Fury fight wasn't announced, because he just looked a little bit flat in there for me. He didn't look like the Parker of old. To be honest, Parker's better than this. I did a post weigh-in video yesterday. I don't know how many of you guys saw it, but I did a video reacting to the weigh-in, and I said he's getting a little bit heavy, Parker. He weighed in at 246 pounds yesterday, and I said at the time, this is a lot heavier than some of the performances early on in his career, and for a guy who relies on movement and hand speed and combinations, it may not be a good thing. And if we look at his 3 most recent fights, they've all gone the distance, actually. Or maybe not. Maybe he fought Dimitrenko somewhere in there. But yeah, he went the distance against Ruiz, he went the distance against the Cam, and now he's gone the distance against Cojanu. And in all of those fights, he's looked beatable. I mean, Takam took 4 or 5 rounds off him minimum. Ruiz took 4 or 5 rounds off him minimum. And Cojanu, who's a bit of a gatekeeper type guy, if that, maybe more journeyman type guy, has against all odds just gone the distance. So maybe Parker needs to cut himself down in weight a bit more. He looked slightly more explosive when he was in the 230s, 10, 15 pounds, 5, 6 kilos less than he was there today. I think for a guy who's a moving, boxing, fast punching combination fighter, it's key to be mobile, it's key to be light on your feet, and maybe being a bit heavier hasn't actually suited his style. I mean, there's a lot of combinations. I think Huey's pull out and the fact they were replaced by a very different opponent who didn't come to win is one of them. The fact that Cojanu had no ambition and was really in sparring partner mode was another one. The weight might have been another one. I thought the inside work was questionable. I'd have liked to see a bit more angles, a bit more uppercut, a bit more feinting. His corner also, I have to question some of the corner work. His corner were giving no signs of urgency at all. They were just letting him breeze through the fight, and they seemed to be almost encouraging Joseph Parker to descend to Cojanu's level and go into sparring partner mode, where I think really it would have been better for Joe if he'd gone through the gears and really tried to get Cojanu out of there. It would have made more of a statement and helped build his profile a bit more with regard to some of these big fights. Because I got to say, right now, not saying I agree with this, but the UK commentary team were sort of making out that Tony Bellew and Dillian White would be favourites over Joseph Parker or something to that effect. And that's the impression that he's creating globally with these kind of performances. I mean, I know Parker's better than that, but a lot of the watching public won't do, which I think is a key factor. I'm sure if Hughie Fury had been in there, Parker would have fought a different fight. I'm sure it would have broken down very, very different. But based on that performance that Parker put in tonight, he did look quite beatable. And he's looked beatable in the Ruiz and Khan fights as well. So, I just think he needs to consider what he can do differently. I'd like to see him come into the fights a bit lighter. I'd like to see him still do a bit more work defensively. I'd like to see him still deal with inside fighting a bit more. We saw in the Khan fight he was weak maybe when someone was putting the pressure on him on the inside, but we also saw in this fight that maybe there's some limitations to Parker when he was putting the pressure on someone else. And if he's going to go up against the giants of the heavyweight division, Wilder and Joshua and Fury, these massive guys, he's not going to be able to rely on his outside boxing because they've got much more range than him. So he's going to have to try and work out how to fight with a bit more education on the inside when he is able to close that gap from range, because he doesn't have the natural size of those guys. And for me, it was all a bit sloppy and a bit cuffing on the inside. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Was Cojanu better than expected? Was Parker worse than expected? Let me know the reaction in New Zealand. Is this as disappointing a fight as it appears from an outsider's perspective? In many ways, Parker putting in a somewhat questionable performance. Whilst it may not inspire confidence globally in terms of his capabilities, perhaps it's not a bad thing in terms of actually getting him these big fights. Perhaps Wilder's looking at that, perhaps Dillian White's looking at that, perhaps Tony Bellew's looking at that, and they're thinking, chuck me in with Parker right now. And perhaps we may actually see these fights more likely to happen. I mean, that's the only silver lining you can say. But a disappointing fight, a drab fight. Let me know your thoughts, guys. If you're new to the channel, please hit the thumbs up button so you can check out all of my other stuff. Drop your comments in the section below. Please subscribe, please hit the thumbs up. And thanks as always for watching. Cheers all.